Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot, a podcast that explores how AI is changing media, journalism, and content creation. I'm Pete Paschal, longtime tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, and I'm excited to bring you fascinating conversations with fellow journalists, media executives, and the people building all the ways we'll create and consume news in the future. I'm thrilled this week to talk to Olivia Joslin and Toshit Panigrahi of TollBit. TollBit is one of a handful of companies tackling a very hard problem in media today, and that's how to get people to pay for content. Well, not people, machines actually. You see, AI companies scrape the entire web for information to ingest into their large language models, media sites included. This kind of web scraping used to be fairly benign. It helps power things like Google search and has traditionally been used as a research tool. But now the big AI guys are just taking that information and summarizing it for audiences without doing so much of the linking anymore. And that's kind of a problem. Publishers are very motivated now to find ways to be compensated when someone scrapes their content. And that's exactly what TollBit is trying to create, a marketplace where publishers and those who want their data can make a simple exchange, money for information. Of course, things aren't always that simple, and I got into the complexities, the politics, and the realities of trying to get someone to pay for something that they've up until now been getting for free. It was a really illuminating conversation, and I hope you listen all the way to the end where we zero in on what a healthy media future looks like. And if you do enjoy the podcast, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend or a colleague. And I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to the Media Copilot newsletter if you haven't already. I also really appreciate it if you'd leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app you're in. Those really do help the show get in front of more people. And lastly, you can check everything we offer, including AI training classes for media, marketing, and PR professionals at mediacopilot.ai. Okay, I'm done. Now, here's my conversation with Olivia Joslin and Toshit Panigrahi of TollBit. Olivia, Toshit, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Hey, Pete. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. We're thrilled to be here.
Oh, I'm thrilled you're here. I'm really excited to get into this. But since probably most of my listeners might be meeting, certainly you guys, but also TollBit for the first time, I'd love it if you could give us a little bit of background on TollBit. I described it a little bit in the intro, but how would you describe it? What does TollBit do?
Great question. So I think best way to describe it, one of our investors calls it very nicely, a paywall for bots. So we charge AI companies for coming and scraping publisher content.
Gotcha. So basically, if a robot is interested in reading, scraping, is there a difference between scraping and some other activity? I feel like the term scraping is used a lot, but it's one of these terms that I'm not sure if everyone knows exactly what they mean when they're talking about scraping. So can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, I think scraping is the act of a machine coming and autonomously accessing content from a website, right, for whatever purpose. It's something that's been around, since the beginning of the internet. Everyone has been web scraping, for whatever purpose. Sometimes people use it for market analytics. Some people use it for indexing the web, like Google did. But I think the flavor of web scraping with the advent of AI is now different, right? It's it went from something that was, we were taking it to maybe, for some market intelligence or some derived activity, and now you're taking content and you're not driving page views back, right? You're taking content and you're disintermediating publishers, right? By answering questions, right? By reading that content, right? So the flavor of web scraping, right? Once with the advent of sort of LLM and GPT tech is now different. And I think the other thing that changed here in the world, right, was the number of people who can web scrape has just exploded. Because before you needed to have, it was largely a white collar professional, activity. You needed specialized tooling, Python scripts, notebooks, for example, Jupyter notebooks, and now anyone can use one of these online LLM tools, right? Take your pick, which one it is. You can ask it questions, and it will scrape the web for information. So the number of people, right, that can web scrape has just exploded, and these tools are getting embedded. This technology is getting embedded into every sort of tool out there, right? So the number of surfaces that people can web scrape also has increased. Olivia, I don't know if I missed anything on that.
No, I think that's exactly right. And so we were looking at this explosion of web scraping that was occurring with the adoption of AI tools and AI agents that can go out and fetch information on our behalf, and we'll be able to take end user actions on our behalf. And fundamentally, we realized we needed to provide infrastructure to ensure publishers are informed and fairly compensated in this new world. And so, that's really what TollBit is. We help publishers monitor, manage, and monetize the AI bot traffic to their sites.
Nice. And I think that's a really good assessment of what TollBit does and also kind of why it's necessary. And here's sort of my read on sort of what you said and my sort of general sense of the situation of web scraping. And I guess maybe it's cousin or maybe it's a brother from another mother indexing that in the olden days, it's not like people didn't sometimes scrape websites for evil, so to speak. I used to be the chief of staff of CoinDesk, and we would deal with this a lot and I think all publishers kind of do to some extent. Someone scrapes your content, duplicates it somewhere else, and gets whatever benefit there might be from having a duplicate article. And there's all these sort of content farms that sort of do this. And everyone knows that's bad. And there's also kind of a reality to it, but it was a minimal part of the internet. And then there was sort of the doing it for good, so to speak, which is, your Googles of the world, your search engines. Okay, they're indexing sites. They're feeding these big data sets like Common Crawl, which is also used for research. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, there is a de facto bargain in doing that, your content is now distributed. It is like, oh, now people can find it on these big platforms or, in the case of research, certain people that use the research and then credit you, which is kind of, so you had this sort of light and dark, right? And now I feel like with AI, it's gotten really gray. It's very much like, okay, there hasn't really been a full determination or decision on exactly to what extent what AI sites do. And I think the word you used, the disintermediate, is thrown around a lot, but that's exactly what we're talking about. And we don't know like where that's sort of lying on the scale of light to dark. And while we wait for some authority to tell us, we need something to deal with the situation as it is now, right? And that seems to be like what you guys have come up with. Is that a fair assessment of like what sort of the environment is, do you think?
Absolutely. And that's why I think, one of the most popular things with publishers right now on our platform is just getting visibility into the problem and seeing, getting onto TollBit and seeing like what AI traffic looks like to their sites today, whether folks are circumventing robots TXT. I'm sure you've seen some of the headlines around that and what publishers have discovered on our analytics tool there. But that's really kind of the tip of the iceberg here is just learning about the problem and informing folks about it and then getting to a point where we're hopefully moving from, it being a gray area to actually helping folks monetize that content and data for AI agent access.
Cool. I'd like to dive in a little bit on the how, right? I mean, this isn't a technical podcast, but like, how do you know? Like it's a web scraper. And I got really fascinated about this from a recent headline that I'm sure you saw, and I think you guys even put some stuff out about, which is the whole thing where Forbes accused Perplexity of like, oh, you took our article and then you repurposed it, and then Wired did its whole thing. Oh, we investigated, and it looks like, and there was some technical in the weeds stuff there, but they were like, we saw an IP address that grabbed stuff, and that IP address is associated with scrapers. Like, how can you tell? Is that it? Is this, you can sort of know? Is there like a list of IP addresses that do this? How does it work?
So it's interesting because you take us back to the inception of TollBit, right, where we started, and back when we started, we actually started as a cybersecurity tool, right? We wanted to defend against exactly this, right? Which is we realized AI companies were going out, they were scraping content, and sort of there was no tool that was specialized enough and equip for this new era, right? And so we went down that path, but something really startling had started happening by that point. And as we were building that tool, we started looking at the new gen web scrapers that started cropping up. Some of them now are venture backed, right? And those web scrapers, right? We'll call them advanced web scrapers for what it's worth, right? They have AI.
Giving them too much credit, maybe. But anyway, go
on. But they have AI, right, embedded into the web scraper themselves, and their whole value prop was that traditional cybersecurity tools like Cloudflare and Datadome cannot detect them anymore, right? The way they open web pages, scroll, click, and ultimately scrape the content looks exactly like how a human would. And what we realized was, wait, if you take this to the limit, if you extrapolate this outward, right, you end up in this cat and mouse game where you're going to keep trying to detect these web scrapers that are now indistinguishable from human traffic, right? And you could spend tens of millions of dollars trying to combat this problem, right? And this is where we took a step back and said, well, what if we look at this problem differently, right? What if instead of beating the web scrapers, right, which there will be, better and better web scrapers out there to go fetch this content, or more surreptitious ways to go access it, what if there was a way to pay the publisher directly? Because web scraping is not free, right? Web scraping, especially the more advanced these web scrapers get, the more they charge for scraping a piece of content. Why can't we create a framework where I think what we talked about in the beginning, if that thesis is true, that web scraping is about to explode, as Olivia said, because these AI agents can now go and fetch information for us, right? That the AI agent sort of fetching of content could be, bigger than human consumption of content. How do we allow publishers to get monetized, to get compensated in that world, right? And then we started building out the framework and infrastructure for that, where we said, look, if we keep trying to malign, these actors, they're going to find just better and better ways to get the content.
Right.
Let's find out a different way to align incentives here, where, instead of paying web scrapers, you pay the publishers.
It sounds like there's almost a little bit of the Napster versus iTunes logic at play here, which is to say, there's a reality of there's simply progress, and a web scraping, perhaps a more niche part of tech, has now become a thing that everyone's going to use. And I could definitely vouch for what you're saying, because I use various AI platforms, and usually there's even templates for web scraping that you can build into stuff. So it's oh yeah, people just kind of want to do that. And it's part of, again, this gray area of AI and AI agents going off to do things. And so if there's no quote unquote legit option, and wouldn't say for the tech itself, I think you're alluding to well, it's more like a legit option for what the consequence of web scraping will be, which is let's acknowledge the reality of it. All these tools are out there, but there should be something on the other end that is ensuring the legitimacy of this instance of the practice or something. I think it sort of feels like, right? And so you're kind of doing both sort of detecting the scraping, but also telling the scraper what to do, in a sense, or the system, I guess, what to do. And you scrape this content, now pay up.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, and we want to get to this world where we don't want to necessarily, I guess, it's going to be very hard to detect that web scraping, right?
Yeah.
Because as these tools just get better and better, so let's beat that. Let's get ahead of that and create a framework where it doesn't break the bank if you had to go and pay the publisher for content.
Well, and also I think I probably didn't completely finish my thought on the Napster analogy, which is to say, people in that sense wanted to pay a reasonable price, right? People that was the whole takeaway from Napster. People did feel bad about copying music en masse. It was just that there was no legit option. There was no pay $1 for a song, which eventually became the standard on iTunes. And now it's kind of this is what that is, I guess. We'll get into the rates at some point, I'm sure. But it seems like that's sort of the ecosystem that's sort of you're trying to build here. This might be a dumb question, but is it text only? If you're a publisher and you're publishing text articles, or is it just media agnostic? Does it matter if it's audio or video?
Doesn't matter. It's media agnostic. You could license. As long as it's hosted today, well, the majority of folks we work with, their content is hosted on a web page. We can support folks who have archive data and hosting that for them. But it's agnostic to whatever format the media is in.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think the trickier portion of that is the rights management more than actually the technical component of giving access to that.
Right.
Got it. And I'm curious about this because I think about it a lot, and I really, honestly, I love talking to folks like you because I learn how this AI works when I talk about it. But there's clearly a distinction between training data and browsing / scraping, right? So there's a lot of these deals that are being made now, particularly OpenAI has made a lot of headlines and signing deals with major publishers.
Mhm.
And as more has come out about those negotiations, there's a distinction being made between training data and like getting current news stories for whatever platform ChatGPT evolves into. And does this is TollBit primarily concerned with the latter, which is to say the current news articles? Because as I understand the training of AI models, it's essentially one and done. You've done it and you have it, and now it's part of the knowledge base. And is that fair to say? Is that what TollBit does, or is there more? Is there a little bit that has to do with the training?
Certainly.
I don't know.
So we can support infrastructure, that with deals that have training components to them. However, our main focus is the retrieval, referenced by the industry as RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Some folks call it grounding. There's a lot of different terms out there for it, but essentially what it is what you're getting at, which is the idea that these, AI companies and especially the applications being built on top of the core models need to actually fetch high quality content on demand and on an ongoing basis to ground themselves in truth and reduce the risk of them hallucinating. And so the really exciting thing about, a shift towards, retrieval and not only just from the accuracy perspective for users, but it's also exciting because it's a potential reoccurring revenue opportunity. It's not just a one-time check for training on your content and data. As I'm sure you're aware, training really just teaches these models how to speak and what words to use after one another. But retrieval is really what grounds them in truth.
So you said something at the beginning of that intrigued me, because I thought about going in when we get into this conversation. I thought one of my questions was going to be, well, OpenAI is making all these deals. Are they beating you to the punch in a sense on some of this stuff? Or is TollBit compatible with sort of a bigger deal or presumably deals, if you're a big enough publisher, that you're going to start making with various platforms? How would that work with, if a publisher that is interested in working with you also has signed or wants to sign deals with some of these big AI platforms?
I think this is a great question because this comes up often when we talk to publishers. And I think, what we tell them is even if you have one of these deals, even if you have a licensing deal, you need infrastructure to actually facilitate it, right? This is where we call ourselves an and product, not an or product. And it's precisely because of that, of that thing that you just said, right? Like, what if you do have a license with OpenAI, right? There's a long tail of AI applications. Think about all the small language models. Think about all the applications built on top of an open source model like Llama. Think about all the enterprise customers that OpenAI has building on top of GPT-4, for example, right? Every company out there is building some sort of AI tool right now, right? And there's hundreds of AI startups that are challenging different facets of search or advertising or news, right? There's tons of them out there, right? Or booking flights, right? Or booking a travel thing, right? Everyone needs access to that content. And it is not possible for every AI company to make a deal with every publisher out there. It just cannot happen. Right. And you need one place. And I think that's actually, and we do have some partners doing this, the beauty of sort of the way we've developed TollBit, where you can actually do really sophisticated syndication or licensing through the platform, where you can actually come in and say, hey, this is a partner that should have access to these pages. And in these pages, they should not be allowed to access, for example, images or audio. And we can actually transform and make that available. And at the same time, you can participate for, say, 3 or 4 AI startups that are trying to access your content, where they're paying, for example, our marketplace rate to fetch that content. So now you have different types of licensing that's happening all through one platform, and you're getting compensated for all of those.
Oh, that's really interesting. I was going to make one of the questions, like what level of control that the publisher would have once they want to work with this, and it sounds like it can be pretty granular. That there's a lot of levers they can push and pull. Does this and this is probably the nerdiest question I'm going to ask, but does it intersect with the robots.txt protocol? Is that something that this supersedes? Is it part of that? Like, how does it work? Because obviously that we mentioned it earlier, but it's the way up until now anyway that folks have been using to signal to crawlers what to do with their content. How does it work with that?
You're absolutely right. So robots.txt, since the beginning of the internet, has sort of been a social contract that folks, should be abiding by when going before they scrape, seeing if they could have permission to do so. I'm sure with the headlines you're aware that like folks have been sometimes circumventing that on the AI company side. And so
kind of the honor system.
Yeah,
right?
The honor system. So obviously, with our analytics, folks can realize that and detect it. But what we've been talking, to publishers for a long time now is, there's without, there being a clear legal precedence to date. That doesn't mean that the courts won't rule on it, and there will be eventually around robots.txt. It's important to put up something more firm, such as a paywall, to put folks on notice that there is a price to the content and data.
Right, and it's purely additive, right? So,
Right.
if you, for example, you say that, you mentioned earlier Perplexity was bypassing it, right? Or, or another AI company might be bypassing it, right? So if you put up, and this is what we're seeing with the publisher on the platform, where you can say that, hey, I don't want, these 5 user agents are disallowed. And then we actually work with their teams, and we have a bunch of documentation on our site of how you can actually forward. So instead of just trusting them, right, based on the honor system, you can actually take a more proactive approach, and you can say, hey, these 5 user agents, whenever they come to my site, they're getting forwarded to the TollBit subdomain, right? So they're being met with a message saying you're unauthorized, you should be licensing this content.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I should probably note that I do believe the Perplexity CEO denied that it was ignoring robots.txt. Again, I think there is evidence that showed they were. I haven't gone to the first party of it. I can only sort of report what they say. But there was, I think, a wrinkle in that story in that others had ignored it, and they scraped from the people who had done the ignoring, sort of passing the buck a little bit. Again, you can argue your liability and the legal arguments there. But I would imagine with TollBit that not that wouldn't happen, but it is just another sort of dimension to the scrapers getting redirected and just another wrinkle in the whole process.
100%. I mean, without I think without dispensing any legal advice, right? I think what what is going to be decided with training and what is fair use and all, right? Like we're going to see, right, how the courts are going to play out on that front. But I think there's well-established precedent for if you go behind a paywall, if you bypass a paywall, if you penetrate, if you, for example, abuse an API, if you bypass cybersecurity measures, right? That's computer fraud, right? You could argue that's computer fraud, right? That's not just a social contract anymore.
Well, I agreed. And since you brought it up, let's talk fair use. So it seems to me, okay, so the general stance of AI companies, and this may have adjusted a little bit, not, I think, explicitly in the last few months, has essentially been anything that's publicly on the internet, that's training data for us. We're going to scrape that and we're going to use it, and that we're going to throw that in our systems and train our models on it. Now, there's court cases that are pending that will address this directly, but it seems to me generally the pendulum's starting to swing in the other direction, the sort of the nuh-uh camp. And there was a recent poll I was reading. It said that, I think, I forget who did it, but I saw it in Politico. It was like 3/4 of folks they polled think that AI companies should compensate creators for using their data. So the ethos of your platform, I think, sort of epitomizes that view. But, we've been talking about it, but sort of walk me through how you see the first principles of this, because there's sort of this almost anthropomorphizing of what AIs do in these cases sometimes, where it's like they say the AI is just doing what a human does. They're reading stuff and then, processing that and putting out something quote unquote original.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, we'll try again.
I don't know what that was. Sorry about that.
Whomever said that. I think OpenAI might be listening in here or something. But I mean, what do you say to that point of view? Is that like doing what a human does? Why wouldn't that be fair use?
I think there's multiple sides to this, right? So there is, I think, a lot of the litigation and the court cases and a lot of the discourse right now is really focuses on training, right? The AI scientists will tell you, well, this was a purely academic and research activity, that went wrong, or someone capitalized on it, and this shouldn't have been out in the wild. You could take that stance, and you can say, like, the courts will decide ultimately what is fair use. Like, does fair use apply to model training or not, right? And I think in that camp as well, right? I think we've heard. I think in the discourse, right, with music, this applies to folks saying that, hey, if an artist listens to 100 songs and decides to go make a song, right, where do we decide that, it was derivative versus it was just, inspiration, right? And I think it is sort of a gray area here, right? And we're not going to, obviously we're not legal folks. We're not in the courts. We're not going to decide this. We're not arguing these cases one way or another. And it actually speaks to why we started TollBit where we did, right? The angle that we took, which is, we started looking at this and saying, hey, we'll figure out what happens with the training component, right? The courts will decide, the litigation will decide, legislature or government regulation will come out around it. However, if you're taking a piece of content, if we've moved on beyond training, and I decide to go scrape 10 articles to go answer a user question, you could argue you took away from a site's traffic, right? You're now actively, you could argue you're causing damage to someone, right? And that is calculable, right? You can put a price on it, right? If we say that, hey, there's going to be AI summarizations across 100 different sites, and AI summarizations are going to exist, we can tell what that impact to web traffic is going to look like, right? And this is where we said, look, if you remove the AI component of this and you really look at what we've set up, it's almost like a on-demand syndication platform, right? Where you're saying, hey, I needed to take.
Good way to think about it.
Yeah, I needed to, and that's, I think, the neat thing, right? Which is if you remove the AI component, it starts looking like more like regular licensing and syndication. When now all we've done is we've opened this up and said, hey, here's a really easy way. If you needed to use these 10 articles as part of your grounding or citation or your RAG use case, whichever you want to call it, here's a way to compensate the people you took that content from.
That's interesting. Yeah, I like that because it's less about what we were talking about earlier with the distinction between training, or it is about that, but I can sort of see that being sort of the line where the courts might come down on like training versus the on-demand stuff. Although if they did, like my question would be, well, why is it okay for this but not for that? Even though I understand the technical difference between them, but you're still ultimately taking content and doing something with it. So I don't know. And also, like, historically, like government courts, I don't know how sophisticated they get on these things. But it's going to be interesting, really interesting to see how this plays out. I was just sort of curious where you guys sort of might land on that, because I definitely see sort of both sides of it.
It's fascinating. And we also saw like this all taking a long time, right? From a litigation perspective, a legal perspective. And we were sitting around, in October, November last year, we were like, if we don't help or try and put something in place here of infrastructure and get folks to move faster, like we worry that the government's going to take too long to make these sorts of decisions. And, as Toshit double clicked on earlier, there's precedent when it comes to paywalls and cybersecurity tools and things of that nature. So we just tried to figure out a way where, we could be of assistance while the government and the courts are figuring all these things out.
Totally. So just to be clear, you guys you don't use blockchain, do you?
We do not.
Got it. Because I know blockchain comes up a lot when people talk about like verifying things online.
Yeah.
Obviously, because it's the technology as a distributed ledger, it's very hard to hack. It becomes this public record that anyone can access. There's a lot of sort of inherent qualities to blockchain that obviously can be tied to some verification thing. So I know there's other solutions out there that may not do exactly what you do, but sort of do similar things. I know I know Fox is doing something with something called Verify. There's I don't know how much content they're doing, but there's like the Ethereum attestation network or service. I forget the exact acronym, but those use blockchain. Why do you think blockchain isn't necessary for this solution?
Oh, this is one where I wish we had our CTO on the call. I think he could answer more elegantly than we can. But and actually, on that note, we actually do have a publisher on our platform that's also using Verify.
Okay. So it's not incompatible.
No, it's not incompatible. And I think the thing that Verify and blockchain technology can perhaps do neatly is, and this is not what we're in the business of, is provenance, right? Like, publisher X wants to say that this was my photo or this is authentic. This is a different problem that needs to get solved, right? Which is, I actually wrote what I said I wrote, right? And this wasn't like some spoof or an adulterated image that's been a photoshopped image that's been recirculating the internet with my watermark on it, right? And I think blockchain is very good for that, right? I think where it falls flat, suppose say porting it over to trying to use it for what we're doing is it's too easy to say because for example every content or every I guess at a high level to think about it, everything gets signed and hashed into a specific, hash code, right? Is to say then that if I was to alter anything in that article, a sentence, even a comma, right, and remove a comma, that now looks like a completely different piece of content, right? So you could republish that and someone, because you can't look at what the real article says, it looks like someone was accessing a completely different article, right? But if you wanted to, but that's what makes it powerful for the other use case, right? So if you had an image which was a source of truth and someone changed a pixel on that image, yes, you could see that image was altered.
I see. That's a good way. Yeah, it solves a different problem. I see what you're saying there. I'm sure there's technical things you could do to sort of figure out what if a comma was changed and stuff. But I could see why do that if you don't have to, and if this works well enough without that, I guess would probably be an inherent scalability issue, which always comes up with blockchain applications. Like, why put yourself through that? Makes sense. So you mentioned a publisher that signed up that's using Verify. I'm curious, how many publishers have you signed up at this point? I remember reading articles about you've had about 50. Maybe that's a little higher now. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it definitely is a bit higher now. But that's our most recent published. We'd have to check in with the team about where folks are in onboarding to get you the most recent numbers. And I think we're going to come out with an announcement about that in a little bit here.
Oh, but you can tell me.
We've had a flood, an onslaught after all of the articles came out recently, as I'm sure you could imagine. So we'll have to check in with the team about the latest.
We opened up self-serve onboarding, so there's been a few.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. So fair to say double at least?
I'd have to check where folks are at in the funnel and just to confirm. But we'll be in touch about that soon.
All right. Well, I might have to do a little editing then. Who are some of the people that have signed up?
So on the publisher side, and I guess both sides of the business, we're not in the business of disclosing their names because it's sometimes sensitive, to kind of what they're currently working on. But definitely in talks with a lot of core companies on both sides.
Yeah, we're working on making the names public. It's just we have to be sensitive because sometimes there's deals in the works, and this is a very, very sensitive space.
Makes sense. Do you have to be of a certain size to use TollBit? I'm sure there's a lot of smaller publishers right now that are probably, very small operations that are I'm interested in not getting swept up in just whatever platforms decide, and can I sign up? And is it even realistic? I'm not sure. Well, maybe one, it seems for people just listening and not watching on YouTube, it seems like any publisher, I'll let you guys answer in a second, but also I'm very curious, what does the fee structure look like? Is it purely metered? What sort of resources do you need to integrate TollBit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when we started TollBit, it was really important to us from day one that this works for the long tail kind of on both sides. So we work with folks on both sides of the market, whether it's the AI companies or the publishers of all sizes. And Toshit and our CTO and team have made the infrastructure so flexible and simple for folks as well, that it's pretty tech stack agnostic. And we have a lot of public documentation on our site that talks about, the specifics there. But that was really something that was really important to us. In terms of onboarding and implementation, it's typically very simple. Usually takes even the bigger companies on average from an IT perspective, less than 30 minutes to set up TollBit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look at that.
We try to make it as simple as possible. And, and especially now with the self-serve sign up, right? Like, obviously, like you have sites that are just, they're what, they're small. There might be local sites, local news, for example, right? Mm-hmm. All the way up to, we have publishing groups that have more than 50 sites, right? That are household names, right, on the platform as well. So the scale can actually support, the as Olivia said, right, the biggest publishing groups down to your indie blogs.
And do people have to make deals on the other side of this? Like, do you need to have a handshake with the scrapers, the old AI companies? Or do they just, immediately once they start using their technology to scrape sites, they'll just suddenly be thrown to your system? Or is basically that how it works? And then they, I presume they have to do something to pay. So they got to sort of get somehow in the system. But how does that work? Does it require some kind of bigger deal? Like, say, OpenAI wants to start using TollBit customer content. Do they talk to you guys directly, or can they just literally fill out a form?
I think OpenAI would not just fill out a form. I think there's going to be a big discussion with them.
Are you talking to them?
I think just by nature of where we are, we have to talk to every AI company, big and small, right? Like it's an emerging market, right?
Well, there's a lot of them, I understand.
There are quite a few of them. I think the big ones are countable, right? But the small ones are uncountable, right? And I don't think have any, to be honest, like I don't know if all of them will have capacity to get publishing deals with every publisher out there, sure. Right? So, but to your point, exactly, I think the folks who are signing up, you don't need to have a deal with, a big model company. I think this is why we try to give value to publishers out of the gate, right? So you sign up for TollBit, and I think Olivia talked about this earlier, right? We really try to say there's the 3 M's: you monitor, you manage, and you monetize, right? So you first sign up, you can monitor, you can see who's accessing your content, right? Oftentimes that's data that they, it might be expensive to run those reports or find that information. So you get that out of the gate. Then we help you manage, right? So this is what I was talking about earlier, right? How do you turn robots' text from a passive compliance to an active compliance, right? Let's forward them off. Let's show them that tell them they're not authorized to access the content. The third piece of that is monetization, right? And this is where we figure out, and we're working with a few, AI pilots right now for folks who want to pay for content through our platform, right? And this is the third piece, right? But this is where we're trying to figure out, really handhold both sides and say, hey, we're trying to figure out a model here. We're trying to make a sustainable ecosystem for both sides.
So there's another piece I want to ask about, and of course, it's all about me, which is to say, if you are, essentially an independent publisher, and you are publishing to a platform like I do to Substack and through my podcast, Spotify and various other places, what's my involvement here? Do I have to wait for Substack to essentially figure out how to do something with TollBit or some other solution? For folks that aren't just publishing a website, does TollBit have anything to offer them, or is it? Are they sort of waiting for that sort of platform level deal to happen?
I think it becomes, Olivia, what do you think? I think it becomes sort of a more another interesting sort of, I guess, dynamic in the play, because I don't know about Substack, but I know Medium has taken a fairly public stance on this, right?
Right.
If you're a writer on Medium and Medium is not willing to comply or participate, right? I think there are a few folks who do have their own websites, right? So whatever content's on Medium is also available on some other blog. But I think you would, Olivia, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think you would have to be at the mercy of that platform a little bit.
Today, that's correct. Yeah. And we have had some folks, reach out and ask some of those questions. So it's something we're giving some more thought to. But as the tech stands today, that would have to be the flow.
Right. Makes sense. It's sort of things like this that I think get people to consider leaving these platforms sometimes because of the limitations. So interesting to see how that evolves. All right. So zooming out, we're looking to the future. We're projecting out 5 years. What does a healthy media AI ecosystem look like in 5-10 years' time? And what is TollBit's role in that ecosystem?
Well, I think on a longer term horizon, I think let's start from I guess things that we believe fundamentally to be true. We do think that sort of AI and AI agent consumption of the internet will vastly dwarf humans, right? Like there's going to be way more AI consumption of the internet than humans, right? And that's something that we firmly believe. And it's the reason for that is also, if you use I think you said this earlier, right? I think people have a misconception of what AI is doing, or they try to humanize it in some way. But AI doesn't read the internet the way humans do, right? I mean, think about what we do. We will Google something, we'll click the first link, we'll click the second link, and then we'll get bored and move on, right? And SEO is super important, right? In this new world, the AI is not reading the way humans do, right? These tools, if you use them, they're happy to scrape 10 to 20 sites to answer your question, right? We think that content consumption is about to explode in a way we've never seen before. And we want to lay the groundwork for publishers to capture that economic value. And this is part of the pitch we tell them. We talk about 5 years from now, we tell them, look, you're monetizing 50 million human eyeballs today. You know how to do it, right? What we're helping you do is monetize 50 million AI eyeballs that are coming to read your content now, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we think. We think of, when we look at, what TollBit is doing and what is our market opportunity here, we're addressing a page view problem, right? What happens as more and more page views are consumed by AI, right? And we do think that pie might get bigger, right? Like, I think there's some statistic that we have about, a couple hundred page views that the average American consumes every month. AI is going to be doing thousands of page views on your behalf, every day, perhaps, right?
Everyone's going to have their own agent.
Everyone's going to have their own agent.
It's going to make us so much more efficient. We'll be able to complete so much more of our research and items in a day that, that content consumption is going up, not only because of the reasons Toshit outlined and like the number of pages they consume, but like how rapidly we're going to be able to complete our research and our tasks as a result of that, which makes me really excited. But I also think it's a great opportunity for publishers and content creators and for the explosion that's about to happen there.
Yeah, and this is why we call ourselves TollBit, right? You're paying a toll to access bits of information. And we think that we're that access layer, that infrastructure layer, that monetization layer. How do you give access? How do you allow people to actually compensate you for that, right? So every time AI is coming and scraping bits of information off your site, they should be paying some toll to access that.
Awesome. Olivia, Toshit, this has been great. Thanks so much. Where can people go on the internet to find out more about TollBit?
www.tollbit.com. This has been so fun, Pete. We really appreciate the conversation today. It's been awesome to meet you.
You too. Thanks for your time. I'm really excited to see where you guys take this. This has been a really great discussion.
Thanks so much, Pete.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Olivia Joslin and Toshit Panigrahi. If you want to check out TollBit, head on over to tollbit.com. And if you like what you heard, please take just a minute to leave a rating or review for the Media Copilot in your podcast app. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter and check out mediacopilot.ai for our classes on AI for journalists, marketers, and content creators. Be seeing you in the future.